New York City is home to over 350,000 homeless people. That's more than the entire population of Miami. And the number keeps rising every single day. In the heart of Manhattan, where every square foot of land costs more than gold, you might see an elderly woman curled up next to a pile of trash, or a child asleep on a park bench clutching a torn backpack. This isn't a movie. It's not a staged photo. It's what's happening right now at the very center of the American dream. New York used to be a place where people came to start over. Today, it's where dreams fall apart the fastest. In this video, I'll take you beyond the glow of Times Square billboards, into the corners of the city no one wants to look at, where former office workers, plumbers, taxi drivers now fight for space in subway stations, where children learn how to survive before they learn how to spell, where seniors must choose between dinner or their medication. But before we talk about numbers, policies, or reports, I want to tell you about someone named Lydia. She used to have a small apartment where she planted flowers on her balcony and read books in the late afternoon. One day, the lease, which wasn't under her name, was terminated. Lydia was evicted. No help, no paperwork, no lawyer. 40 years later, she's still sleeping on the streets. And the hardest part isn't the cold. It's the feeling that she has become invisible. So today, we begin this journey with people like her, those whom society is slowly forgetting. If you've ever visited New York, chances are you've been to Times Square, where the lights never go out and thousands of people take selfies every day under the neon haze. But if you slow down, turn off the bright boulevard and walk just a few side streets, no cameras, no tour guides, you'll see a very different New York. Less than 10 minutes from the dazzling Broadway shows near West 39th Street, dozens of tents line the sidewalks. Under a pale street lamp, you'll see a man warming his hands over a tin can fire, a woman wrapped in a filthy blanket, and a 10-year-old boy holding on to his worn-out backpack, saying nothing. Above them, towering glass buildings with law firms, finance offices, and advertising agencies. Shiny MacBooks, $6 lattes. Below them, the cold silence of those left behind. Some call this vertical class division. It sounds like an academic term until you see someone sleeping in the doorway of a Rolex store. New York has never lacked light, but that light doesn't reach everywhere. Behind Penn Station, through the back alleys of Hell's Kitchen, darkness isn't just about night. It's about neglect, about being uncounted, unseen, unimportant. We often think of poverty as something far away, but here it lives right under the most expensive rooftops in America. It creeps into the subway, casts shadows across Central Park, hides beneath glowing LED signs. The deeper you walk into this city, the more painful the truth becomes. New York doesn't lack money or opportunity. What it lacks is fairness. And if the wealthiest places are where injustice becomes the most visible, then we must ask, who suffers the most? The answer isn't always the young. Let's turn now to those who helped build this city and are now being quietly left behind, the elderly.
We'll start this next part with a simple question. How does someone who worked their entire life, paid taxes, followed every rule, end up sleeping on the sidewalk? It sounds like a simple question, but in today's New York, it's a heartbreaking reality, repeated over and over again. I met Mr. Thomas, 72 years old, outside a train station in Lower Manhattan. He was a power line worker for 35 years. After retiring, He lived off a small pension and his modest savings. But then, his wife got sick. The medical bills kept coming. Money ran out. The house was repossessed. He became homeless in less than a year. "I'm not begging," he told me, with the quiet dignity of someone who once belonged. "I just need a roof, a place to sleep." And he's not alone. Bloomberg's 2024 data shows a simple breakfast in New York can now cost nearly $20. A carton of eggs, $9. A liter of milk, double what it cost pre-pandemic. Meanwhile, the average retirement income in America is around $1,800 a month, far too low to survive in this city. And that's just food. There's still medication, transportation, clothes, and of course, rent. A one-bedroom apartment in Manhattan now averages over $4,000 per month. Even young full-time workers are struggling. But for seniors, no income growth, declining health, no one hiring them, it's a dead end. Worse still, public support systems can't catch them. Many elderly like Mr. Thomas technically qualify for aid, but the paperwork is a maze. There's no one to guide them. Or worse, no one who cares. Just like Lydia, the woman I mentioned earlier. She should have received social benefits years ago, but her file got lost, and she stayed outside. No advocate, no one to fight for her right to a locked door. And that's the problem. Being homeless at 70 is not the same as at 30. The young can recover, but the elderly? They can't. One cold night, one bad fall, one infection can be the end. And the saddest part? No one sees them. No one speaks for them because they're no longer productive, no longer marketable. The city they once helped build now has no space for them. And if even the elderly who've contributed their entire lives can't keep a roof over their heads, what's waiting for the children growing up homeless today? When children have no home, no school, and no childhood, what kind of future can we expect? Do you remember what your first bed looked like? Soft, warm, a place where you could dream big? But for thousands of children in New York today, their only dream is to have a clean mattress to sleep on.
I met Lisa, a 13-year-old girl, standing outside a small church in the Bronx. She clutched a bag of donated food. Her hair was tangled, her eyes tired, but she still gave a faint smile when someone approached her. Lisa used to have a home, but after a serious argument with her foster parents, she was kicked out. Since then, she's been sleeping wherever she can, on playground benches, in building doorways, and finally, in front of the church, the only place she feels safe. When I asked her what she wished for, Lisa simply said, "I wish I had somewhere to sleep, somewhere that was mine. Not toys, not vacations, just a place to sleep." And her story isn't rare. According to the Coalition for the Homeless, around 23,000 children sleep in shelters or on the streets of New York City every night. Without a stable address, many don't go to school. Without medical records, they don't get proper treatment. With no protection, they're vulnerable to violence, abuse, even trafficking. These kids don't learn to spell first. They learn how to protect themselves, how to avoid eye contact, how to hide food, how to pretend they're asleep when they're scared. And worse, they learn that they are a burden. How can they grow up to be part of society when the only thing they've been taught is how to be invisible? According to the National Center for Family Homelessness, homeless children are 4 times more likely to drop out of school, 3 times more likely to suffer from depression, and 10 times more likely to become homeless as adults. It's a cycle with no exit, unless someone steps in on time. And the question isn't, why don't they try harder? It's, why do they have to start life already behind? If a city can't take care of its children, what kind of future will that city have? And that is only the tip of the iceberg. Who do you picture when you think of a homeless person? Someone unemployed? Addicted? Lazy? How about someone wearing a button-up shirt with an ID badge around their neck, leaving the office at 5 p.m. and sleeping in their car at night? I met Elena, a woman in her early 40s, working full-time at a finance company in Midtown. She earns nearly $60,000 a year, a decent salary in most places, but not in New York. She used to share an apartment with a roommate. When her roommate moved out, the landlord raised the rent to $3,800 a month. Unable to find affordable housing, she chose to live in her old SUV, shower at the gym, and still show up to work every day like nothing had changed. She told me, "I feel like I'm living two different lives, a professional one during the day and one at night where I try not to breathe too loud." And she's not alone.
According to Pew Research Center, America's middle class has shrunk by nearly 11% in just 2 decades, and in New York, it's disappearing even faster. Rent continues to climb, salaries remain stagnant. To live a stable life in New York, a family of 4 needs at least $8,000 to $10,000 per month after taxes. And if one person in the household loses their job or gets sick, it only takes 1 or 2 months before housing becomes impossible. There are thousands of people like Elena, hardworking, debt-free, sober, yet still unable to afford a place to sleep. They live in their cars, in temporary shelters, or in rundown motels on the city's edges. They still go to meetings, still send emails, still Zoom from their phones. And when night falls, they look for the darkest place just to get a few hours of quiet sleep. And the cruelest part? Society doesn't recognize them as poor, so they don't qualify for assistance. But they're clearly no longer part of the middle class. They've fallen into the space between, where no one reaches out to catch them. Middle class used to mean security. Now, it just means you're next. And if even those working full-time, playing by the rules, can't afford a roof over their heads, what happens to those without papers, without jobs, without family? For decades, New York has been the destination for those chasing a better life. The Statue of Liberty was never just a symbol. It was a quiet promise that said, everyone deserves a new beginning. But what happens when tens of thousands arrive in this city with hope and nothing else? In the past 2 years, over 175,000 migrants and asylum seekers have arrived in New York, from Venezuela, Haiti, Ukraine, Syria, and even from other U.S. states like Texas and Florida, places where they no longer had a roof over their heads. They came here with faith that New York would have space for them. But New York is already struggling to take care of its own. I spoke with Mateo, a migrant from Colombia. He arrived with his wife and 2 young children after a year-long journey through multiple borders. They were placed in a temporary hotel for 14 days and then told to leave. No papers, no job, no access to benefits. Since then, they've been sleeping on the sidewalk in Queens. "We didn't come to take anything," Mateo told me, glancing down at his son sleeping on a park bench. "We just want the chance to work, to take care of our own family." Meanwhile, longtime New Yorkers, also struggling with housing, food prices, and unstable jobs, began to feel left behind. They saw newcomers getting access to emergency shelter, food, and medical support, and it made them feel like they were being pushed further to the margins. Tension began to grow, not out of hatred, but out of a shared sense of injustice. And caught in the middle of it all was the city government.
New York has spent over $2 billion in under a year to support the influx of migrants. But the system, already stretched thin, is now on the brink of collapse. Shelters are beyond capacity. Food programs are running short. Support workers are pulling 20-hour shifts just to keep things from falling apart. The result? Both migrants and native residents are being left behind. Both feel forgotten. And where homelessness used to be the result of poverty or addiction, now it's a byproduct of an overwhelmed system where the most vulnerable are forced to compete for a spot to sleep. When a city no longer has space for those who just arrived or for those who've lived here their whole lives, we must ask, is there still room for everyone in the American dream? And when all you have is a backpack, an asylum application, and a fragile hope, is that dream still worth chasing? That question might be best answered by those who once had homes, steady jobs, and stable lives, but ended up on the streets anyway. There was a time when middle class meant security in America. They were the ones working 2 jobs, paying taxes, raising kids in modest homes with old cars and big hopes. But in New York today, none of that is enough anymore.
I spoke with a couple in Queens, both college graduates working in education and public health. Together, they earned nearly $100,000 a year. Sounds comfortable, right? But after taxes, rent, childcare, insurance, food, and transportation, they had less than $200 a month to save. When the husband's hours were cut during the pandemic, they lost their apartment within 3 months. They moved in with relatives, temporarily. But that temporary status still hasn't changed. They didn't make bad choices. They weren't living above their means. They just lived in the wrong city at the wrong time. And they're far from alone. A recent Pew Research Center survey found that the number of Americans who identify as middle class has dropped nearly 11% in just 20 years. In New York, the decline is even faster. Rents are up, living costs are up, but wages, especially in public service sectors like teaching and healthcare, have barely moved. The result? The buffer zone between rich and poor, once protected by the middle class, is disappearing. And when that buffer collapses, the fall from everything to nothing is sudden and brutal. The middle class isn't poor enough to qualify for aid, but they're not wealthy enough to save themselves either. They live on the edge, where one medical bill, one car accident, one round of layoffs can unravel everything like a row of dominoes. And when the hardest working, most educated, most committed people are being pushed to the margins, this is no longer a housing issue. It's a societal collapse in slow motion. The question is no longer who deserves help, but who's still able to give it. Because if the middle class falls, who's left to hold the balance? In the next section, we'll explore something few dare to speak about: neighborhoods in the heart of Manhattan that even the police hesitate to enter. When instability lasts too long, the city begins to deform. Parks become shelters. Parking lots become tent camps. Streets become no-go zones. So what's really happening in those places? And why is even the economic heart of America starting to rot from the inside? Would you believe that in Manhattan, where each square foot costs thousands, there are streets where officers no longer patrol? Where stepping in feels more like walking onto a post-apocalyptic movie set than into New York? Just a few blocks off Broadway, on West 39th Street between 9th and 10th Avenues, you'll find what used to be a lively neighborhood: diners, garages, small shops. Now, it's a tent city. Dozens of makeshift tents line the sidewalks, soaked with the smell of garbage and urine, filled with watchful eyes in the dark. I walked past a man lighting a fire in a tin can with damp newspaper. He said nothing, but the child beside him never took his eyes off me, as if trying to decide whether I was a threat or a chance. Places like Hell's Kitchen, around Penn Station, even some corners of Central Park, public order there is no longer guaranteed.
Even the police, trained to handle crisis, are pulling back. One Midtown officer told me candidly, "We don't have the people to keep it under control anymore." And honestly, going in might be more dangerous than staying out. This isn't just about crime or chaos. It's about what happens when a system gives up and people start building their own rules to survive. Tent cities are no longer rare. They're multiplying. Invisible zones that no tour map will ever mention. And the closer you get to the city's economic core, the more visible they become, as if the light from Wall Street can no longer reach the ground. And why does that matter? Because when a city has areas where safety is no longer a basic right, anyone could be next.
When sidewalks become beds, when public parks turn into shelters, and when the government can no longer, or chooses not to, intervene, we're no longer just talking about poverty. We're witnessing the slow collapse of the social fabric. But there's something even worse, something few talk about. Even those who want to escape, who want a job, housing, stability, they see no way out. Because in New York today, the cost of simply staying alive is far too high. A loaf of bread, $6. A carton of eggs, $9. A basic breakfast, nearly $20. Not at a fancy restaurant, not at the airport. This is the daily price of survival in New York City. If you thought expensive was just an exaggeration, the numbers might change your mind. According to Numbeo and Bloomberg 2024, New York has officially overtaken San Francisco and Los Angeles to become the most expensive city to live in the United States. Basic grocery prices have surged by 75 to 90% in just a few years. I once stood in line at a small grocery in Brooklyn and saw an elderly man stare quietly at a $9 carton of eggs. He picked it up, set it down, picked it up again. Finally, he walked away with 2 packs of ramen and a single banana. Nothing else. As prices soar uncontrollably, welfare benefits, especially for seniors, remain nearly unchanged. The average Social Security check is around $1,800 a month. But just food, medicine, and transportation easily add up to $1,200 to $1,500 a month. And that's not even counting rent. Here's the harshest reality. A 1-bedroom apartment in Manhattan now rents for over $4,000 a month. That means you'd need to earn at least $12,000 a month to meet federal housing affordability standards. There is no miracle that allows someone on a modest income to survive here without sacrificing something. Sometimes it's meals, sometimes health, and sometimes shelter itself. But the most painful part, it isn't just the story of the elderly, immigrants, or the long-term homeless. It's the story of working people, educated people, people who once belonged to the so-called stable class. They go to work every day, they live frugally, they follow every rule, and then one medical bill, one car breakdown, one contract that doesn't get renewed, and everything collapses. We now live in a city where survival is no longer a basic right. It's a privilege. In the next part, we return to a topic many avoid. Not everyone chooses to live on the street, but not everyone has a choice. The shelter system, designed as a temporary solution, is it really helping the homeless, or is it silently trapping them in a cycle of poverty and despair? We often say at least they have a place to stay in the city's shelters. But the truth is, many choose to sleep outside, even in the freezing cold, because the shelters can be more dangerous than the streets.
I met Richard, a man in his 50s, sitting behind a bar on the west side. He used to be a delivery worker. After his wife died of cancer, his life unraveled, not because he gave up, but because he no longer had the strength to recover alone. He told me he once stayed in a shelter, but after 3 nights, he left.
I got robbed, there were fights all night, the smell, the yelling. I couldn't sleep. I felt like I wasn't human anymore. Since then, he's chosen to sleep on the sidewalk. He uses wet wipes instead of showers. He looks for well-lit spots at night to feel safer. Richard's story is not uncommon. According to humanitarian organizations, thousands of homeless people in New York actively avoid shelters due to the harsh conditions, lack of safety, privacy, and opportunity. New York's shelter system, the largest in the country, is now critically overburdened. Facilities built for 30 to 40 people are now housing 80 to 100 each night. Overcrowded, unsanitary, disease spreads, violence and harassment are common. Worse yet, most shelters only operate at night. During the day, people are forced to leave, wander the streets, then line up again in the evening. It's a dehumanizing loop. For those with mental health issues, PTSD, or simply need a quiet place to heal, the shelters are unlivable. They're not temporary. They're a trap. A system that doesn't lift people up. It teaches them to bow their heads. And because of that, more and more people have lost faith in any kind of help. Not because they don't want change, but because they no longer believe the system can deliver it. So what are they left with? The eyes of strangers, a kind word, a few spare dollars, an old blanket, or sometimes nothing at all. Just the long silence of another cold night. In our final chapter, we'll hear from the invisible ones and ask a question bigger than all the rest. If even New York, the city of the American dream, no longer has room for them, then where else can we still place our hope? Do you have 3 months' worth of savings in your bank account?
If you lost your job tomorrow, if a loved one got seriously ill, if your rent suddenly went up by 30%, are you sure you wouldn't become homeless? That was a question I used to avoid. And it's also a question that hundreds of thousands never thought they'd need to answer until everything collapsed within just a few weeks. Homelessness is no longer a condition reserved for the poor, the addicted, or the unemployed, as many still believe. It's slowly becoming a risk, even a temporary reality, for a growing part of society. Workers, immigrants, seniors, young people, even those who were once stable. I remember a young woman named Jasmine, a full-time barista in Brooklyn. She rented a small room with 4 roommates and worked 6 days a week. Then one night, her landlord raised the rent. She couldn't afford it. Within 48 hours, she and her suitcase were out on the street. She said, "I didn't think this could happen to me." But then it did. What stays with me isn't just the hardship they face, it's how the world reacts to them. When you're lying on the sidewalk, the world looks at you differently. When you ask for a meal, eyes turn away. When you look homeless, you're no longer accepted as part of this city. But these are people who had names, jobs, lives. And they're still here, still breathing, still existing among us. You don't need to become a social worker. You don't need to fix the whole system. Just don't look away so quickly. A kind glance, a small question. Are you okay? Or, if you're able, a gift card, a warm coat, a hot sandwich on a cold winter day. And if you're someone who writes, films, creates, don't forget to tell their stories, the stories of those the city has forgotten. Because when the heart of America, New York, begins to slow its beat, the question is no longer, how many have fallen? It's why we let it happen without even noticing. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this journey. If you found this video meaningful, please share it with a friend, a coworker, or anyone who might be willing to look closer at the unseen corners of our society.
Let's make sure their stories are no longer invisible. And if you'd like to join us for more content that's human, honest, and real, don't forget to subscribe. We'll be back with true stories from real people in places where the light has yet to reach. See you in the next video. And thank you for listening.